I'm Dr. Lena Popovic, and after 30 plus years in medical practice, I realised there's a lot missing from modern medicine. Education is more powerful than medication, and our decisions have more impact than our DNA. Last week's Brain Booster was turn up the heat. In contrast, today's Brain Booster is turn down the pressure. And this entire podcast episode was prompted by a weather question. So I'll give you the question first, and then I'll answer it in the context of a brain booster, health headline, and what's missing from modern medicine. And because it's a personal question, I'll keep the identity of the individual confidential. But I've asked a colleague to read it out to provide contrast to my voice. In my response, I will refer to the person as Jody, but her name isn't Jody.
Can you tell me whether it's better to tackle high blood pressure with Western medicine or alternative medicine? I have never smoked, do not drink alcohol. I weigh 73 kilograms at height of 1.78 centimeters, so not obese. And I exercise 6 out of 7 days for a minimum of 1 hour per day with fit cross, swimming, running and cycling. My blood pressure sometimes spikes to 160 on 85 with low pulse ranging between 40 to 60. I appreciate you being genuine and open to everything.
Now that question is relevant to everyone, whether you realise it or not, because chronically sustained high blood pressure, known as hypertension, and chronically sustained are the key words here, not a single high blood pressure reading, but prolonged, unrelenting high blood pressure over a number of years, acts as a constant, silent physical strain on your entire circulatory system. That includes your heart and all your blood vessels to all your organs, arteries, veins, capillaries, and lymphatics. And over time, this excess force damages blood vessels and organs and becomes a primary driver of life-threatening cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. But the biggest issue with hypertension is that it rarely shows obvious symptoms until you've sustained really significant damage. So unless you get it checked regularly, you don't know that you have hypertension. But the recorded numbers of people with hypertension around the world, i.e. the prevalence, is 39% of Australian adults, 47% of American adults, and 30% of UK adults. Roughly 40, 50, and 30% respectively. They are big numbers, so it's a condition well worth understanding. And before we dive into the details of why high blood pressure matters to your brain, let's get clear on what blood pressure actually means. Blood pressure is the force of blood pushing against your artery walls, and it has two numbers. Systolic pressure, the top number, is the pressure in your arteries when your heart contracts and pumps blood out of your heart to be circulated to your organs. So it measures the maximum force your blood exerts against your artery walls. So this is always going to be the larger number. Diastolic pressure, the bottom number, is the pressure in your arteries when your heart relaxes between beats, allowing it to refill with blood from your veins. And blood pressure is measured in millimetres of mercury, and an example of a reading is 120 on 60. So what's normal and what constitutes high blood pressure? Well, interestingly, that depends on where in the world you live. The World Health Organization, WHO, defines normal blood pressure as anything under 140 on 90. So 139 on 89 is fine, high normal, but fine. But 140 on 90 requires treatment, whether that's through lifestyle changes or medication. Australia, New Zealand, and most European countries pretty much agree with the World Health Organization, but they have added some sub-classifications. They are optimal blood pressure, less than 130 on 85, though Australia is edging towards 120 on 80. High normal blood pressure, 130 to 139 for systolic and 85 to 89 for diastolic. And then you've got grade 1, mild hypertension, grade 2, moderate hypertension, and grade 3, severe hypertension, the latter being over 180 on 110. The US, on the other hand, defines hypertension at a significantly lower threshold. Anything above 120 on 80 is considered elevated and you will be offered treatment. That's a big difference to 140 on 90. And it's based on a study called the SPRINT trial, which stands for Systolic Blood Pressure Intervention Trial. And that study found that adults aged 50 or older who were at high risk for cardiovascular disease or who had chronic kidney disease, they were 25% less likely to die from a heart attack or stroke and 27% less likely to die of any cause if they were aggressively treated with 2 to 3 medications that lowered blood pressure to 120 on 80. That was compared to the control group, who also received medications, but only 1 or 2 medications to reduce their blood pressure to the standard goal of under 140 on 90. Now, would this intensive approach benefit everyone, i.e. people under the age of 50, without any other risk factors for heart disease and with no signs of kidney failure? We don't know. So at this point in time, different countries are taking different approaches. So if you live in the US, one way to get off some of your antihypertensives, as those medications are called, is to relocate to Europe or Australia. But the most important thing is to measure blood pressure correctly in the first place and on more than one occasion, because it's all too easy to get an inaccurate reading even with your doctor. So my first question to Jody is, what do you mean when you say my blood pressure sometimes spikes to 160 on 85? When exactly does your blood pressure spike? Is it straight after a workout, in which case it would be normal, first thing on waking, at the end of the day, or at random times when you take your blood pressure? Because firstly, blood pressure naturally fluctuates throughout the day. It follows what is known as a circadian rhythm. And blood pressure also varies in response to what we're doing, in response to what we're eating, drinking, and even in response to what we're thinking and feeling. So usually, blood pressure starts to rise a few hours before you wake up. It continues to rise during the day, peaks at midday, then drops in the late afternoon and evening, and it's usually lowest while we're asleep. This is known as nocturnal dipping. And the drop in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure while we're asleep can be as much as 20% lower than our blood pressure during the day. If you don't have lower blood pressure while you sleep, that needs to be investigated because it puts you at a high risk of heart disease and stroke. Then there are all the different things we do throughout the day that spike our blood pressure at random times because of what we're doing. So let this be a checklist for Jody and for everyone else. This will spike your blood pressure. Any form of physical exertion, running for the bus, carrying heavy shopping bags, smoking a cigarette, blood pressure goes up within seconds of inhaling. And I know this doesn't apply to Jody, but I'm just giving you examples of things that increase our blood pressure and need to be avoided before having a blood pressure reading. But if you're a smoker, you're more likely to have hypertension anyway. A cup of coffee or other caffeinated beverage, your blood pressure will generally spike within half an hour to 2 hours later. But your genetic makeup plays a significant role in determining how much your blood pressure rises after consuming caffeine. A very rough average would be an increase of 3 to 10 millimeters of mercury after a cup of coffee, but regular coffee drinkers often develop a tolerance that significantly blunts the initial blood pressure spike, regardless of their genetic profile. What else spikes your blood pressure? A full bladder, being in physical pain, a sore tooth, a severe headache, receiving bad news, feeling angry, any form of psychological stress, getting a fever, feeling really cold, being dehydrated, a few glasses of alcohol, a poor night's sleep, or just not having had enough sleep, or sitting for prolonged periods, which I cover with great enthusiasm in podcast episode 6. And even just one dose of any number of medications, for example, over-the-counter cold and flu medications and decongestants that contain pseudoephedrine and phenylephrine, they act as a stimulant and they can spike your blood pressure almost immediately after a single dose. And of course, stimulants like prescription ADHD medications, illegal drugs, cocaine and amphetamines, and even some pre-workout supplements. So, before you go to the doctor to get your blood pressure checked, make sure you've avoided all the things I just mentioned. And even having been stuck in traffic on the way, or worrying that you'd be late for your appointment, or not being able to find a close parking spot, or being surprised at having to pay for on-site parking, all these things can also measurably elevate your blood pressure. And long-term use of several common prescription and over-the-counter medications can also cause high blood pressure, or they can worsen existing hypertension. And they do that mainly by causing fluid retention, constricting your blood vessels, or changing your nervous system. What are those medications? Way too many to list them all, but a few really common ones I will mention. One, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, abbreviated NSAIDs, like ibuprofen and naproxen. They're very common painkillers. Secondly, corticosteroids. That's medications like prednisone and methylprednisolone, which are used to treat chronic inflammation or autoimmune conditions. Hormonal contraceptives that contain estrogen. They can cause small, gradual increases in blood pressure in some women. And in fact, hypertension is a contraindication to taking estrogen-containing birth control pills. And then you've got certain classes of antidepressants, such as SNRIs, which stands for serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. You'd know them by names like venlafaxine, Effexor, Cymbalta. Do not stop taking them abruptly, but if you have high blood pressure concerns, speak to your doctor about switching to a different antidepressant, or better still, keep listening to this podcast, and over time, you may be able to wean yourself off antidepressants altogether. But always consult your doctor before making any changes to any of your medications. And immunosuppressant drugs like cyclosporin, frequently prescribed after organ transplants, they are well known to increase blood pressure. All right, let's say we've ruled out all of these issues. My next question to Jody is, how is your blood pressure being measured? Because an alarming paper published in the journal Clinical Medicine in September 2023, that's quite recent, estimated that because of incorrect measurement techniques, wait for this, more than 23 million Americans are being diagnosed with hypertension when they don't actually have high blood pressure. And the same mistake is likely to be occurring worldwide. How on earth is this possible? What constitutes incorrect measurement techniques? Well, the American Heart Association, AHA, has actually published a protocol for obtaining accurate blood pressure readings. And I'm going to run through the checklist so you can see if this is how your blood pressure is taken when you go to the doctor. And I'll bet probably not even half of the criteria are being met. 1. The patient needs to sit quietly for at least 3 to 5 minutes prior to having their blood pressure taken. That means not rushing into the doctor's room immediately after stressing to find a parking spot, not needing to empty your bladder, and not looking up all your symptoms on your phone and receiving a list of potential diseases you might have. It also means not getting annoyed that your doctor is running late and keeping you waiting while someone else's child is wailing in the seat beside you. Use the time in the waiting room to breathe slowly and deeply. And maybe you just focus on your breath while visualizing a pleasant scene from nature. Secondly, your doctor needs to ensure they're using the proper cuff size. Make sure there is no clothing under the cuff and no talking. Simply having a conversation about nothing in particular while having a medical professional take your blood pressure can skew readings higher. Sit in a chair with your legs uncrossed and feet on the floor, because all these things can raise your blood pressure. Don't have your blood pressure taken while lying down. Sit with your back supported, and your arm also needs to be supported with the cuff at heart level. If any of these criteria are not met, you could receive a falsely high blood pressure reading. So when a nurse or doctor take your blood pressure, take all the steps that you can take to ensure it's done correctly. And one more thing to be aware of is what's known as white coat hypertension or white coat syndrome. This refers to a person's blood pressure shooting up simply when they're in the presence of a healthcare provider or because being in a clinical setting makes them nervous. Which brings me to another question for Jodie. Are you taking home readings? If so, what type of blood pressure monitor, known as a sphygmomanometer, are you using? If it hasn't been validated, and about 85% of the monitors available in Australia have not been validated, they can actually be quite inaccurate, especially wrist and finger monitors, which are not recommended. So, if you buy one for your home use, only use an automated upper arm cuff monitor. And before you buy one, make sure you measure around your bare upper arm according to the manufacturer's instructions to ensure you select the correct cuff size. If it's too small, you will get artificially elevated readings. In Australia, you can find a list of blood pressure devices that have been validated on the Menzies Institute for Medical Research website. In the US, to find a validated, clinically accurate blood pressure monitor, search the device model or brand on the Validate BP device listing or the Stride BP registry. These platforms list monitors that meet strict independent clinical validation criteria. But the most reliable way to diagnose true hypertension, what's referred to as the gold standard, is by having ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, and that uses a small, wearable, battery-operated digital blood pressure monitor over a 24-hour period, because this will eliminate misdiagnoses caused by the stress of having to go to the doctor, and it captures vital overnight data. It also catches instances where clinical readings appear normal, because they're really just one brief snapshot in time, but your blood pressure might be high for the rest of the day. And the way it works is the device is attached to a strap or belt, which you wear around your waist or your neck, and it's connected via a thin tube to an inflatable cuff worn on your upper arm. And the monitor just automatically inflates the cuff at preset intervals, usually every 15 to 30 minutes throughout the whole day. And it'll do that hourly at night. And it records your blood pressure and your heart rate as you go about your normal daily routine and as you sleep. And if the ambulatory blood pressure monitor confirms consistently high blood pressure, then you need to do something about it. All right, let's say you have a diagnosis of confirmed hypertension, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. The first step is to work out the cause. And hypertension is classified into two main types based on its underlying cause. Primary hypertension, also known as essential hypertension, which accounts for 85 to 95% of all cases of hypertension, and secondary hypertension, which accounts for the rest. But when a doctor tells you that you have essential hypertension, what they're really saying is there's no clear medical cause. It's due to the interaction of genetics, age, diet, other lifestyle factors, and luck. But you and I know that the cause is conflict, which I introduced in my first podcast episode. Conflict with one or more physical, psychological, emotional, or spiritual needs. And that covers a lot of ground. So if you haven't listened to podcast episodes 1 to 3, which lay the foundations for my approach to healing all diseases, including high blood pressure, I strongly recommend you do so. And you also know from my previous podcasts that hypertension is not a diagnosis. It's a symptom. And the cure is curiosity. What might be driving that symptom? And what can you do about it? Secondary hypertension, on the other hand, is a direct result of an identifiable underlying medical condition like kidney disease, sleep apnea, thyroid problems, or adrenal gland disorders. And it often appears suddenly, and it's also more common in younger adults. Your doctor will know how to identify these causes and they will treat you accordingly. But once again, you and I know that the true cause of secondary hypertension is also conflict. It's just that the conflict has targeted a specific organ, which has then gone on to cause high blood pressure as a corollary. And I would add to the list of secondary causes PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because it keeps your nervous system in a heightened state of alert, which pushes up your blood pressure. But your doctor will rarely explore PTSD as a cause of high blood pressure, so you will probably just be given the label essential hypertension. But it's something for you to know and be aware of and explore if that might be an issue for you. Now, before we unpack how to approach both essential and secondary hypertension through the lens of conflict, let's take a look at what's happening to your brain and body while they're subjected to consistently high blood pressure. And this is really important because there are rarely any symptoms of hypertension until you have a heart attack or stroke. And in my experience, if there are no symptoms, people are not motivated to do anything about a condition. So here's a snapshot of what's happening behind the scenes. Firstly, constant high blood pressure forces your heart to work harder than it was designed to work. That, in turn, causes your heart muscle to thicken, stiffen, or weaken over time, which can lead to heart failure. High blood pressure also accelerates atherosclerosis, that's plaque building up in the arteries, which restricts blood flow to all your organs. But in relation to the heart, atherosclerosis can trigger a heart attack or cause arrhythmias, which are irregular heartbeats that increase the risk of stroke. If you have any weakened spots in your blood vessel walls, prolonged high blood pressure can cause an artery to balloon out and form an aneurysm. And if an aneurysm ruptures, this is seriously bad news. It can cause life-threatening internal bleeding. So that's just the havoc caused by high blood pressure in relation to your heart. The other organ that's particularly sensitive to hypertension is your kidneys, because they process massive amounts of blood at very high pressures. The clusters of microscopic capillaries inside your kidneys are called glomeruli, and their job is to filter out waste products. If the pressure in your glomeruli increases, proteins like albumin leak into the urine. This is known as proteinuria, which is not only a sign of kidney damage, but it causes further inflammation and kidney scarring, which can ultimately lead to kidney failure. And kidney damage creates this dangerous vicious cycle of ever-increasing hypertension, because as the kidneys lose their ability to filter fluids and sodium, we become fluid overloaded, which further raises our blood pressure. And to make matters even worse, damaged kidneys misfire and release a hormone called renin, which raises blood pressure more again. Hypertension also affects our eyes, and it can lead to visual impairment. And that happens through retinopathy, damage to the light-sensitive tissue at the back of the eye. It happens through choroidopathy, which is when fluid leaks and builds up under the retina, which creates distortion, swelling, or scarring that can severely impair sight. And there can also be direct damage to your optic nerve, or there can be blood clots in the veins carrying blood away from the retina. And finally, getting back to our brain booster, hypertension in midlife, that means elevated blood pressure between the ages of 40 and 65, increases the risk of developing dementia by 20 to 60%, depending on the specific type of dementia, the age of onset of hypertension, and whether you get your blood pressure treated, be that through lifestyle or medications. The most common type of dementia linked to hypertension is, not surprisingly, vascular dementia, followed by Alzheimer's disease. Also not surprisingly, the younger you are when you develop high blood pressure, and the longer you go without treating it, the more likely you are to get dementia. And research from the American Heart Association shows that developing high blood pressure early in midlife, that means between the ages of 35 to 44, can elevate later life dementia by 61%. And if you're in the top 25% of people with the most sustained and severe high blood pressure, you have more than double the risk of developing dementia compared to people with normal blood pressure. So blood pressure is a big deal. But why is it so damaging for the brain? Firstly, elevated blood pressure narrows and damages the small, delicate blood vessels in your brain, and over time, this starves brain tissue of oxygen and nutrients, and that leads to structural brain changes and smaller brain volumes. Secondly, high blood pressure can lead to silent mini strokes, which a person doesn't really notice, but which add up to create a wider area of brain cell death over time. Thirdly, hypertension causes a reduction in brain volume, which I said before, but it especially affects the hippocampus. The hippocampus starts to shrink, and this is the brain area vital for learning and memory. Fourthly, hypertension disrupts the blood-brain barrier and the brain's ability to clear away metabolic waste, promoting the accumulation of toxic proteins like beta amyloid and tau, which are the two hallmarks of Alzheimer's. And finally, this was a study published very recently in May this year in the journal Neurology. Researchers at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, found that not only was higher blood pressure associated with poorer thinking, planning, decision-making and memory, the greater a person had seemingly unprovoked swings in their blood pressure throughout the day and while they slept, so that means their blood pressure went from high to low to somewhere in between to high again, the more their blood pressure fluctuated like that, the greater the damage seen on brain MRI scans and the more leaky their blood-brain barrier, especially in people who carry the ApoE4 gene, which is known to increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's. And I discussed the genetics of Alzheimer's in last week's podcast on heat exposure. So if you missed that episode, I recommend you go back and listen to it, especially as it also relates to managing hypertension. So that's the end of the bad news in relation to today's episode. The rest is all good news. So you can sit back, relax, and enjoy discovering how to boost your brain by turning down the pressure. Today's health headline is a really big one, and that is sugar, not salt, is the biggest driver of high blood pressure. That doesn't mean salt plays no role at all, but it means that if you cut out sugar and refined starches, you might not need to worry about salt. Let me explain, because this comes as a big surprise to most people. In episode 6, Skip the Sugary Sip, because every soft drink is a bullet to your brain, I discussed the biochemistry of sugar in relation to brain health. So do go back and listen to that episode if you need a refresher on how sugar drains our brain of energy and promotes brain insulin resistance. And you'll recall from episode 6 that sugar, chemical name sucrose, is made up of two smaller sugar molecules, fructose and glucose. And just as fructose and glucose are involved in different biochemical pathways in our brain, they also follow different biochemical pathways in relation to their influence on blood pressure. But before we get into the biochemistry, it's important to become aware of where the sugar in our diet is coming from. Because even if you don't have a sweet tooth, you don't drink soft drinks, energy drinks, sports drinks, cordials or juices. You don't eat cakes or biscuits or chocolates or ice cream or donuts or pastries. You don't put sugar in your tea or coffee, and you don't cook with sugar at home. You might still be eating a lot of sugar, but you don't realize it because it's hidden in what you actually consider healthy or savory foods. Now, I'm talking here about sugar that's added to processed foods, not the sugar that occurs naturally in vegetables and fruits. I'm not talking carrots and berries. So where might the sugar be lurking that you don't realize? Number one, breakfast cereals. And that includes cereals with clever marketing, relying on words like grain, bran, honey or fitness to look like health foods despite having sugar profiles comparable to dessert. And those that trip people up the most, though personally I would avoid all breakfast cereals, but those that trip people up the most are Sultana bran and Raisin bran. They routinely exceed 20 to 30% sugar by weight because the dried fruit is concentrated sugar. And on top of that, the sultanas and raisins are heavily coated in sugar during processing. Cereals like All Bran apple flavoured crunch. The inclusion of fruit flavours and clusters drives the sugar up to more than 17%. Nutri-Grain, famously marketed for decades as Iron Man food, is highly processed and contains roughly 25% sugar. That's a quarter of the box is sugar. Now, Iron Man might burn that amount of sugar in a day, but you and I don't. And yes, you can get lower sugar Nutri-Grain, but lower sugar is still too much sugar. Fruit muesli. Even if there is no added sugar, heavy amounts of dates, raisins and sultanas increase the sugar concentration dramatically, and natural, in inverted commas, granolas. Those crunchy clusters require a binder, and that binder is almost always a heavy syrup made of honey, maple syrup, brown sugar or rice malt syrup, and that will typically push the sugar content to over 15 to 25%. All syrups, by the way, are just different forms of liquid sugar. Where else might sugar be hidden that you don't realise? Flavoured yogurts. They can contain loads of sugar. And even if they're labelled sugar-free, if they're flavoured, they will contain artificial sweeteners, which can also contribute to high blood pressure, albeit through completely different biological pathways to real sugar. Now, I'm not going to discuss artificial sweeteners today because it's a huge topic and I will dedicate an entire future podcast episode to artificial sweeteners. But just be aware that artificial sweeteners are not a healthy option. But natural, unsweetened, unflavoured yogurt is absolutely fine as long as you tolerate dairy. Then the other sugar bombs are all your savoury sauces. Barbecue sauce can have 2 teaspoons of sugar for every tablespoon of sauce. Tomato sauce can be 1/4 sugar. Sweet chili sauce, teriyaki sauce, hoisin sauce, oyster sauce, they can contain more sugar per serving than chocolate sauce. And pizza and pasta sauces. This is the ones you buy in the supermarket, ready-made, not the ones you make yourself. But half a cup of a pizza or pasta sauce can contain up to 2.5 teaspoons of added sugar. And the other big Trojan sugar horses are canned soups, baked beans, salad dressings, mayonnaises, non-dairy milks. Not all brands contain added sugar, but many do. Frozen meals and packaged meats like ham, bacon, jerky and commercial beef snack bars. They often introduce sugar into the brine or the curing rub. Honey-cured or maple options, they're obviously sweet, but even standard deli turkey and salami, they use sugar to preserve moisture and balance the saltiness. So almost anything can have added sugar. And that means you need to read labels carefully to find out. However, this poses another challenge because sugar doesn't always go by the name of sugar on the label. Sometimes it does, but even then, when we hear words like raw, organic, or beet sugar, or something even fancier like demerara, or turbinado, or muscovado sugar, sometimes we think these might be healthier options, healthier sugars anyway, but they're not. Sugar is sugar, regardless of the adjective that precedes it. And in addition to anything with the actual word sugar in it, there are literally hundreds of other names for sugar. And this is a deliberate ploy by the processed food industry to try and obscure the fact that their products contain sugar. So here are just a few examples of pseudonyms for sugar: sucrose, glucose, fructose, dextrose, maltose. Anything that ends in ose, O-S-E. Also, as I mentioned earlier, anything that contains the word syrup or juice is simply liquid sugar. So examples are corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, sometimes just abbreviated HFCS, glucose syrup, maize syrup, malt syrup, maple syrup, carob syrup, golden syrup, invert sugar syrup, refiner's syrup, rice syrup, sorghum syrup, fruit juice concentrate, apple juice concentrate, grape juice concentrate, dehydrated cane juice, evaporated cane juice crystals. It's all sugar. Then we get into some really deceptively healthy sounding names: agave nectar, molasses, treacle, honey. Yes, I'm sorry, honey is 85% sugar. And even though it contains over 300 minor biochemical compounds like antioxidants, enzymes, and trace amounts of vitamins and minerals that make it superior to refined sugar, if you consume honey by the tablespoonful, your body simply treats it like a damaging overload of fructose and glucose. And finally, there are malt and starch-derived sugars like maltodextrin, barley malt and barley malt extract, dextrin, ethyl malt, diastatic malt. And these are just a fraction of the more common names for sugar. Now, this might sound like I've just turned your grocery shopping into a sugar minefield, but all you have to do when you read a label and come across an ingredient you don't know the meaning of is ask Google, is this whatever the word is, or it could even be a number, so is this word or number a sugar? You'll have an answer in seconds, and then you'll be able to make an informed decision about whether or not you want to consume it. Another tip to understanding food labels involves looking at the order in which the ingredient appears. Now, ingredients are typically listed in descending order by weight. So those appearing at the beginning of the list represent the largest components of the product. But another sneaky thing that food producers do is to use multiple types of sugar in the one product. So they don't need a lot of each type of sugar to still end up with a product high in total sugar. And each type of sugar is listed separately near the end of the ingredient list because there's not that much of it, so it looks like the product contains very little of them. One other thing you can do is go directly to the panel that lists the grams of sugar per 100 grams of product or per serving. And 1 teaspoon is 4.2 grams of sugar. So to make the maths easy, divide the number of grams of sugar in the product by 4, and you'll see how much sugar is in it without having to wade through the whole list of ingredients. So for example, if a breakfast cereal has 8 grams of sugar, per 30 grams serving, that's 2 teaspoons of sugar. And if you eat fast food, you can bet you're eating a lot more sugar than if you cooked the same item at home. So how much sugar should we aim for? Do we have to go zero sugar? Or is there a safe level of sugar consumption? Well, the World Health Organization, WHO, recommends the following targets for added sugar in our diet. And by added sugars, they're referring to the sugar added to processed foods and the sugar that you add to coffee, tea, or foods you cook at home. It doesn't refer to the sugar that occurs naturally in fruits and vegetables. Okay, so children under the age of 2 should be consuming 0 added sugars. So check those baby food ingredients. For children between the ages of 2 and 18 years, the ideal target is under 15 to 22 grams of sugar per day, which is approximately 3.5 to 5.5 teaspoons. There would be very, very few children in the developed world who consume that low amount of sugar. Just add up the sugar that your child is consuming in their snacks and breakfast cereals and you'll be horrified. For adult women, the ideal target is under 25 grams or 6 teaspoons per day. And for adult men, 31 grams or 7.5 teaspoons a day. The other thing to note is that each of us has a unique body with individual needs and different levels of tolerance for sugar and carbohydrates before we hit our individual threshold for harm. Obviously, generally, the less sugar we all consume, the healthier we're likely to be. But I've seen, one person might be able to have 8 teaspoons of added sugar a day with absolutely no adverse effects, while another person might only be able to handle 4 teaspoons before their blood pressure and diabetes risk starts to creep up. The point is, if you have confirmed high blood pressure, the sugars, glucose and fructose, that make up sucrose, which is added to 80% of products on our supermarket shelves, could be the hidden cause. How? Let's start with fructose. Fructose raises blood pressure through a combination of salt retention, hormonal changes, and production of uric acid. Because fructose increases the absorption of sodium and chloride, i.e. salt, in both the small intestine and the kidneys. This leads to internal salt overload, causing the body to retain water and increasing your overall blood volume, which drives up blood pressure. Meanwhile, as our liver metabolizes excess fructose, it generates uric acid as a byproduct. Uric acid, when it's elevated, restricts nitric oxide, and that's a vital compound that normally helps blood vessels relax and widen. Without nitric oxide, blood vessels stiffen and blood pressure rises. And fructose also overstimulates the sympathetic nervous system, the body's flight, fright, fight response, which triggers an elevated heart rate and constricts blood vessels. And if all that wasn't enough, high fructose intake can lead to insulin resistance, which prevents blood vessels from dilating properly and causes the body to reabsorb even more sodium. That was fructose. What about glucose, the other half of the sugar molecule? Glucose raises blood pressure primarily through chronic blood vessel damage and, like fructose, insulin resistance. But it drives insulin resistance through a different mechanism to fructose. So when you have consistently high blood glucose, it damages the inner lining of your arteries, causes them to become stiff, which means they become narrower and less flexible. This forces the heart to pump harder to circulate blood, directly driving up blood pressure. And over time, high glucose also damages the tiny filtering units of the kidneys, and as I've already discussed, impaired kidneys struggle to maintain proper fluid and sodium balance, which further elevates blood pressure. So you can see that although salt plays a role, it's the sugar that's driving the salt up. It isn't salt in your diet that's necessarily the problem. It's the sugar stopping you from excreting it. Now, there are a few more interesting twists to the salt story. Firstly, your genes play a significant role in how your blood pressure responds to salt. Roughly 50% of people with high blood pressure and 25% of people with normal blood pressure carry genetic variants that make them salt sensitive. And it happens by influencing how their kidneys filter minerals, how their hormones respond to sodium, and how their vessels react to fluid volume changes. So your genes affect all of those things, which affects your blood pressure. And secondly, dietary salt is significantly more likely to drive up blood pressure in a person with obesity compared to a lean individual. In fact, carrying excess body fat in and around our internal organs, known as visceral fat, actually transforms a previously salt-resistant body into a salt-sensitive one. Fascinating stuff. How? It's because body fat pumps out chemicals that change how our kidneys, hormones and blood vessels handle sodium. The good news is that it's reversible. A person can go back to being salt resistant, i.e. consuming salt won't raise their blood pressure, if they shed the excess body fat. Okay. The other sneaky thing that could be elevating your blood pressure is mouthwash. Using strong antibacterial mouthwash can lead to hypertension by destroying helpful bacteria living on your tongue that regulate blood pressure. Here's how it works, because it's really, really interesting. When you eat green leafy vegetables or beetroot, you consume nitrate. Now, the human body lacks the specific enzymes to break down a nitrate, so friendly bacteria residing in the deep crypts of your tongue feed on the nitrate and can convert it to nitrite. Now, some of the nitrite is converted to nitric oxide in your stomach, and some of it passes into the intestines and is absorbed into the bloodstream. The nitrite in your blood is converted to nitric oxide, and you remember from before, it serves as the body's primary vasodilator. That means it signals the smooth muscles surrounding your blood vessels to relax, open up and widen, which keeps your blood pressure nice and low. But common over-the-counter mouthwashes containing strong antiseptic ingredients like chlorhexidine, cetylpyridinium chloride, I really struggle with that word, CPC for short, or alcohol, they're designed to kill 99.9% of the bacteria in your mouth. And the rinses don't differentiate between harmful bacteria that cause cavities and helpful bacteria that make nitrite. And when there's no nitrite available for conversion to nitric oxide, the walls of your arteries tighten and stiffen, and over time this leads to high blood pressure. In fact, studies show that just one rinse can wipe out the tongue's nitrate-producing microbes for up to 12 hours. And if you use strong antibacterial mouthwash twice a day, it can raise your systolic blood pressure by 2 to 5 millimeters of mercury within just a few days. So to maintain oral hygiene without risking your cardiovascular health, consider swapping to mouthwashes that don't contain heavy antiseptics like chlorhexidine, or better still, you don't need mouthwashes at all. Just brush, floss, and maybe use a gentle tongue scraper. That's all you need to do. What's missing from modern medicine is effective advice on how to lower blood pressure without using medications, because it is so doable. So here are my top 7 non-pharmaceutical ways to reduce your blood pressure, in addition to quitting sugar, getting rid of your mouthwash, and managing stress. Number 1, reap the benefits of sleep. Poor sleep and chronic sleep deprivation are really powerful independent drivers of high blood pressure. 2, abstain from alcohol. Alcohol consumption is responsible for roughly 10 to 16% of hypertension cases worldwide. That's huge. It's more than 1 in 10 people. And it does that through a complex mix of neurological, hormonal, and cellular mechanisms. And the more you drink, the more your blood pressure goes up. But even drinking just 1 to 2 standard drinks per day, which most people don't consider to be a lot, even that will significantly increase your risk of hypertension. Number 3, Move to improve, you've heard that before, but in this instance, move to improve your blood pressure, as well as all the other things that improve with movement. Aerobic exercise, brisk walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, rowing, skipping, lowers blood pressure through direct, immediate adaptations in your blood vessels, nervous system, and hormones. Number 4 might surprise you. Rustle up some muscle. In other words, do isometric strength training. What does that mean? Isometric strength training involves holding a static muscle contraction without moving. For example, you just hold a weight in your hand with your elbow at 90 degrees, like I am now if you're watching, without doing a series of bicep curls. So you're not moving, you're just holding the weight, and you will feel the tension there. Another example would be planks or wall sits. And this lowers blood pressure through a unique physical mechanism called the reactive hyperemia flush. And large-scale clinical evidence reveals that this type of training is even more effective at lowering resting blood pressure than traditional aerobic exercise. When you hold a static pose like a wall sit, the continuously contracting muscle fibers physically squeeze the surrounding blood vessels. So this creates a state of localized oxygen deprivation known as hypoxia, and it restricts blood flow through those specific muscles. The moment you relax and release the contraction, the restriction vanishes, and blood instantly rushes back into the muscle tissue with immense speed and force. And this sudden rush creates friction against the inner walls of your blood vessels. To handle this friction, the cells lining your vessels release a large wave of, you guessed it, nitric oxide gas directly into your blood. And as you know from the mouthwash story, nitric oxide acts like a signal that forces the tight muscles surrounding your arteries to relax and widen. And when you practice this type of training consistently for a few weeks, the temporary lack of oxygen during the muscle holds acts as a healthy stressor. It calms your body's overreactive fight or flight nervous system, and your blood vessels permanently adapt by staying naturally wider, softer, and more flexible, even when you're completely at rest. How good is that? Let me give you an analogy, because I think this is really important to understand so you're really motivated to do it. Think of your blood vessels as a flexible rubber garden hose and your heart as the tap feeding water into it. When you hold a wall sit or plank or static bicep curl, it's like stepping firmly on the middle of the garden hose. What's going to happen? Water backs up and the flow through that section of the hose drops to a trickle. The exact moment you step off the hose, all that trapped water rushes out in a sudden powerful blast. And the inner lining of the hose feels this intense rush of water and instantly releases a natural chemical that tells the hose to soften and stretch. Instead of remaining tight and narrow, the entire hose widens. And because the path is now much wider, the water flows through easily with far less pressure. So, find yourself a personal trainer or exercise physiologist or physiotherapist and ask them to give you a set of isometric exercises. Or you could even ask Google or ChatGPT to give you a plan. A large-scale meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine analysed randomised controlled trials involving over 15,000 participants and ranked the effectiveness of various training modalities for dropping resting blood pressure. And it turns out that while aerobic exercise remains highly effective, it needs to stay as a cornerstone of general cardiovascular health, but isometric training produces nearly double the blood pressure reduction of running or cycling, and it does it in a fraction of the time. And wall squats were found to be the single most potent exercise for dropping systolic blood pressure. And wall squats are where you press your back against a wall and then you've got your legs out in front of you, bend your knees 90 degrees so it looks like you're sitting down, but there isn't a chair under you and you're just holding yourself with your quadriceps. And you don't need to spend hours training to gain the blood pressure benefits. Clinical trials use a highly standardized, brief protocol totaling just under 15 minutes per session 3 times a week. So here's an example of what you would do. Hold a static contraction, like a wall sit or plank, for 2 minutes. And let me warn you, if you've never done this before, it is hard. So to start with, 10 seconds will do and slowly build up to 2 minutes. Then relax completely for 1 to 2 minutes. Just walk around the room, and that will allow the reactive hyperemia flush to happen. And then just repeat the sequence 4 times in total per workout session. And one more word of warning. While holding an isometric contraction, you have to maintain slow, continuous breathing. Never ever hold your breath, because this will spike the pressure inside your chest cavity and could actually trigger dangerous acute surges in blood pressure mid-exercise. You definitely don't want that. The 5th natural strategy to lower blood pressure is step into a sauna. Now, I covered this in detail in last week's episode, number 12, so I won't repeat the rationale here. Just remember that saunas are right up there with exercise as a fantastic way of lowering blood pressure. At least 4 sauna sessions a week, 20 minutes per session. Strategy number 6, breathe, don't seethe. Breath work lowers blood pressure very effectively. What is breath work? Think of your nervous system as having 2 main settings, a gas pedal and a brake pedal. The gas pedal represents what's known as your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response. When you're stressed, rushing, anxious, your body steps on the gas. It pumps out stress hormones that make your heart beat faster and cause your blood vessels to tighten up like narrow straws. This pushes your blood pressure up. The brake pedal represents what's known as your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response. And when you take slow, deep breaths, especially when you make your exhales long and smooth, you forcefully step on your body's natural brake pedal. Because taking deep breaths stimulates a major nerve called the vagus, which sends an instant calming signal to your heart and brain. Your body stops pumping out stress hormones, and as a result, the tight muscles wrapped around your blood vessels completely relax and widen. And because the pathways are now much wider, your blood flows through easily with far less pressure. So what are some effective breathing techniques? To lower your blood pressure, the best breathing techniques all focus on slowing down your breath rate, ideally to about 5 or 6 breaths per minute, and prolonging your exhales. I'll give you 3 excellent examples that you can practice anywhere. The first one is known as coherent breathing, or the rhythm method. Now, this technique perfectly balances your breathing with your heart's natural rhythms, making it great for daily blood pressure maintenance. All you need to do is to inhale quietly through your nose for 5.5 seconds, then exhale through your nose for 5.5 seconds. Why 5.5 seconds? Because it matches your heart. It creates a perfect loop of exactly 5.5 breaths per minute. Practice this for 5 to 10 minutes every day. A second really helpful technique for blood pressure is called the 4-7-8 technique, or the stress buster, because this exercise acts as an emergency brake for your nervous system. And the long hold and extended exhale maximize the widening of your blood vessels. How you do it is firstly, breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. Hold your breath completely for 7 seconds. Then make a whoosh sound as you exhale completely through your mouth for 8 seconds. Breathe in through your nose for 4, hold for 7, then whoosh out with your mouth for 8 seconds. And repeat this full cycle 4 times in total. It takes less than 2 minutes, and you can do it anytime you feel stressed or notice that your blood pressure might be rising. And the third really powerful way to lower your blood pressure is through box breathing, or the equalizer. And this technique is used by military personnel and athletes to lower their heart rate and blood pressure under extreme stress because it clears your mind while calming your body. And how to do this exercise is to imagine a square. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold your breath for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. And hold your lungs empty for 4 seconds. Repeat this square cycle for 2 to 5 minutes. And to get the absolute most out of your breathing exercises, the best times of day to practice are first thing in the morning and right before bed. Practicing breathwork at any time will offer a temporary drop in your blood pressure, but if you schedule your sessions in the morning and in the evening at these 2 critical windows, it targets your body's natural hormonal and circadian rhythms for long-term blood pressure control. And the final strategy, number 7, to lower your blood pressure is pay attention to potassium. Dietary potassium, not supplements, that's a big not potassium supplements, but dietary potassium has been really overlooked as a simple way to lower blood pressure. And potassium achieves this through 5 key actions. Number 1, it triggers the kidneys to pass excess sodium into your urine. Secondly, it prompts your body to release nitric oxide gas, which you now well know widens and softens stiff, narrow blood vessels so blood can flow more smoothly. Thirdly, potassium calms the nervous system. Fourthly, it resets hormones that would otherwise cause you to retain water. And fifthly, potassium prevents your arteries from hardening by stopping calcium buildup. So, what are potassium-rich foods? My favourites are cooked beet greens, spinach and silver beet, also known as Swiss chard, avocado, wild salmon, white beans and azuki beans. Now, baked potatoes with skin and bananas are also good sources of potassium, but because they're very high in starches, I don't recommend eating much of them if you have high blood pressure. You'll also hear that coconut water is rich in potassium, which it is, but once again, it also comes with sugar, which doesn't do your blood pressure any favours, even though it's natural sugar. And how much potassium do you need? To maintain healthy cellular function and control blood pressure, the World Health Organization, WHO, recommends that adults consume at least 3,510 milligrams of potassium per day. But if you have high blood pressure, I'd aim for 4,500 milligrams per day. How do you know how much you're eating? Google the foods I just listed to find out how much potassium they contain, and then you can work out how much you need to eat. Research also demonstrates that the ratio of sodium to potassium in your diet is a far more accurate predictor of high blood pressure and stroke risk than looking at your intake of either mineral alone. And most people consuming an average Western diet eat about twice as much sodium as potassium because processed foods are loaded with sodium. Whereas we need to aim for at least equal amounts of potassium to sodium, and if you're salt sensitive, your potassium intake should probably double your sodium intake. However, and I can't emphasize this enough, I do not recommend using synthetic potassium pills, usually sold as potassium chloride, because they can actually lead to ulcers in your stomach and small intestine and life-threatening cardiac arrhythmias. So stick to spinach and wild salmon. And thank you, Jody, for being the impetus for this episode. I hope you found it useful, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much for listening and for sending me your weather questions. I will get to them all in due course. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And I look forward to sharing with you another brain booster, health headline, Missing Medical Marvel, and Weather Report next week. Please note that this podcast is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice and is not intended to provide specific guidance for any particular situation. The use of this information is at the viewer and listener's own risk and is not a substitute for consulting a healthcare provider.